today I want to take a look at the brand new book from Preston Sprinkle and David C. Cook Publishing called Exiles, The Church in the Shadow of Empire. I want to say thanks to David C. Cook for sending me a copy for review. This is my honest reaction to this new book. I'll take you through my typical format that I do of main idea of the text, the research behind it, the readability of its style, and then my general thoughts and some of my general reactions to this book. Okay, so Exiles is it's a political theology, but it's more accurate to say it's kind of a biblical exegetical look at how does the scriptural text deal with public policy or political organization or socio-political thinking. Both Old and New Testaments. That's an important thing. I would say there's the overall weight of this book is a little bit more on a New Testament theology, but it does try to be holistically biblical in the sense that he has a few chapters on kind of Israel's political organization. It's really hard and in general, it's really hard not to, I feel like anachronistic categories are difficult here because the way we think about politics and nation states just does not map cleanly onto ancient Israel. Be that as may, I'm just going to use those terms that we all know. So yes, so Israel's political organization, as kind of a nation-state-like entity. He has a few chapters that get into what that looked like, and interestingly, how odd that organization was, especially in the ancient world. But there's more chapters and more pages devoted towards a New Testament kind of theology around the life of Jesus, the political actions of Jesus, and then the political subversive nature of the early church communities as depicted in Acts, and then as alluded to, events that are alluded to or talked about, concepts that are talked about in the epistles, particularly the Pauline epistles. So it is primarily a biblical exploration. Like it goes through both testaments. It goes through lots of different categories, there's some word study work in here, but it's kind of trying to get at the question of like, how does the entirety of the biblical canon get at the political posture and behavior of people of faith, Israel in the Old Testament, and then especially followers of Christ as Lord and King in the New Testament. So that's what, and the title Exiles, I should say this before moving on, title Exiles is very apt in that his particular lens, his particular bent is to say, to have an exilic kind of approach towards kingdoms of the world, that our highest allegiance is to Christ as King. And so in a sense, we are kind of living in an exile fashion in that we are under the earthly power of other kingdoms and other kings and other lords, but our high allegiance and highest primary allegiance is to Jesus as King and Lord, while we live as citizens in exile from that kingdom under other kingdoms. That's kind of the thematic tie, and the kind of theological tie of the theology that he's building up over the course of this book. So, okay, that is a little bit longer than I meant to spend on the main idea, but that's kind of what's going on in Exiles. It's much more of a biblical approach than like a theological primary approach. He's building a theology out of the text as opposed to looking at theological concepts first and then trying to build a cohesive, systematized theology that way. So hopefully that gives you a sense of where this fits in the landscape of kind of writings about political theology. Okay. Now the research, this is super interesting. The next two categories play off each other in interesting ways, and I'll talk about the readability in a minute. I was really impressed with the research in this book. Now, I follow his podcast. I follow Theology in the Raw. If you're familiar with that, I follow his podcast and generally kind of his public thinking that Preston Sprinkle does. I've always appreciated and respected, especially his posture. Very much respect his posture and his willingness to be I see him as a very intellectually honest person, and so that's part of the reason I was really interested in this book. And the research is really good. He did really wide and deep reading. And I'm going to say a little bit of a wrinkle on this when I get to my reaction. There's a few, given my leanings and my styles, there's a few people I wish he would have interacted with more, but I don't want to make that as a dig on the research kind of quality as a whole, because it's quite good. And especially when compared with my next point, which is the readability, it could be very surprising how much research went into it. I'll talk more about the readability in a second, but the research is very good. It's very wide. He leans in a very much of an Anabaptist-y type political theology lens, very much a Hauer-Was kind of resident aliens kind of thing. But he does interact, thankfully, with someone like a Peter Lightheart, who brings very different perspective onto that. He's not just echo chamber research. In other words, is what I'm trying to say. But more than that, he really reads deeply. He reads a lot of stuff that is not just the typical what you'd expect. He reads more academic works than what you might expect, given the tone and style of the book. The footnotes, some of the footnotes are very long. He will allude to a point with a footnote, and then when you actually flip back to the footnote, it might be like a page or of more explanation, or at least a paragraph. That was a very common experience as I was reading this book. So there's some serious heft to the reading work that he did and the scope of reading that he did, and that's indicated even more if you actually go read the footnotes and see when he gets into even some more nuances. So I was very pleasantly impressed with that. With the amount of research and homework he did, so to speak, to this project. Okay, that's enough on that. The readability, I've been alluding to this already a few times. The readability is very, very approachable, like super easy to read. Very low bar to read this book. Almost too low, in my opinion. Again, I feel like I say this about books pretty regularly. I almost wish, this is my proclivities as a reader, what I look for in books. I almost wish that some of the footnote meat was brought into the main text. I felt like this about his previous book, Embodied, as well. I want more of that stuff, and I guess you could say, well, it's there, it's just in the footnotes. If you want to chase it down, the book is clearly tailored more towards a much more popular level kind of style of reading, and so it removes some of those barriers to entry. And that's probably overall a good thing. Certainly for selling books, it's a good thing. I just wish I would prefer a little bit more of a heftier academic text. But wow, I mean, this is like super conversational. Like, you can just kind of breeze through this. The chapters are not super long. The style is very, very, very easy to just kind of go through. Goes down easy. This would be, if you're looking for, again, a book that is maybe easy to put in the hands of somebody who doesn't read a ton or isn't even really that interested in reading, but is very interested in politics. I mean, this is not gonna be a hard book to read for anybody. Super, super approachable. Again, if you are looking for more of a denser academic work, that's not what this is. So just know stylistically that's not what this is at all. Okay, my reaction to this. I liked this book. I really did like this book. I have a lot of positive things to say about it. I particularly I think his work in the New Testament is stronger than the Old Testament chapters. I really love, there's a chapter where he takes 8 episodes of Jesus' life and ministry and talks about the political implications of each one. I love that. I think it's one of the best chapters in the book, for my money. Really thoughtful. He includes some things like the foot washing that wouldn't be explicitly political as we might think of it, but I think he rightly includes it in there. And the overall kind of reaction of reading all that stuff is like you just get this indelible sense that, wow, there's politically subversive stuff going on here that's really easy to miss if you take our lens that we tend to have as modern day evangelicals especially. And that's another thing I liked about the book. I really, really, really liked that he pushes hard against this assumed or default mentality a lot of people have, which is that religion is about the soul and private matters and politics are about public good. He really pushes hard on dismantling that distinction. I really, really liked that. I personally resonate with a more Anabaptist type approach towards these questions, so I was in some ways primed to agree, and I do like a lot of what he says. I think the theme of exile could be unpacked a little bit more. I think there's a lot going on there, especially with the Old Testament in particular. That people, N.T. Wright obviously is big on exile as a thematic approach to the scriptures, and Israel being in the land but still being under exile, and how does that mentality carry over to like an epistle like 1 Peter. There could be more work done there, but I like the theme of exile. I like, in general, the overall big picture. I think he's right about so much in how the scriptures, especially the New Testament, talk about how to think about the powers of the world. There are a few things I wish there might have been a little bit more interaction with the notion of principalities and powers. It's there. I wish it could have been fleshed out. But most of my critiques boiled down to I wish this was fleshed out a little bit more, honestly. And that maybe goes back to my desire for more of a meatier academic text, which, again, this is not. So it might not be fair to expect this of what this book is not. So I really want that to be clear, that this is a matter of expectations that you bring to a book. Another person with different expectations would probably exceed all those expectations. So, but I'm putting this out there in case if you follow what I do and you're a big into reading like me, these are going to be, I want you to, your mileage is going to vary with all these thoughts. These all might be things that you actually appreciate more. I don't know. So yeah, I wish there would have been a little bit more digging into like Walter Wink's stuff on principalities and powers and how that relates to earthly governments. Again, it's in there, just want more. I also do wish he does interact with Peter Lightheart. I wish there was more, particularly because Peter Lightheart has some good critiques of Anabaptist thinking. I wish there was a little bit more interaction with like a William Kavanaugh a William Kavanaugh figure writer, because I think he also brings a different Catholic angle on political theology that can push back in really good ways on the Anabaptist lens. The fundamental critique of the Anabaptist way of thinking is something like, it's all well and good to critique and to stand on a prophetic margin, but what do you do when the people in power invite your voice? What do you do when Constantine becomes a Christian, so to speak, and then wants you to have a seat at the table? And this is what Peter Lightheart critiques Stanley Hauerwas for example, is to say, like, do you just keep pouting and say, well, no, I like being a prophet better, I don't want to be at the table, and just exile yourself at that point? What do you do when the powers that be invite you to help them shape the earthly government? Do you say no, or is that a faithful choice? What do you do? And I think that is even though I have Anabaptist leanings, I still want to have room for that critique, and I wish that critique was dealt with in the closing chapters, especially a little bit more in this book. And it's not. The weight of this is really on a biblical presentation, and as a biblical theology, as a thematic approach, chasing down specific words and concepts that are kind of a theme through, especially the New Testament. I think it's really successful and really good and so easy to read. One last thing I want to say about it before this review gets too long is I also really, really liked, I think he does such a good job at listening to pushbacks, and I think he handles the pushback that is very common, is to say that this is all a super privileged way to think about politics. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to sit back and let the empires of the world do their work, and then I'm just going to stay loyal to Jesus while that's all raging around me. The pushback on that is to say, well, that's well and good to say if you can live comfortably while those empires are raging. If you can live comfortably in those empires, then well and good for you, but not everyone can. And that's also a valid pushback, and I think he does a really good job. I think one thing I appreciated about his tone here is that you can tell he's really heard that pushback, and he's internalized it, and I think he's done a very good job. I like the way he handles it in this book. I think it's very sensitive and compassionate, but also convicted to what he sees in the text. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on Exiles, The Church in the Shadow of Empire by Preston Sprinkle, the new book from Preston Sprinkle and David C. Cook. It's very good. There's a lot of really helpful, especially if you're looking for a biblical survey of political ideas and concepts, and especially in the New Testament, it's really, really good. So readable, so well researched, very winsome, very, very convicted. And yeah, a very solid book, especially in this cultural moment right now in 2024 as I record this. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful as you are discerning whether or not you want to spend some time with this book. Thanks as always for taking some time to watch.